John Main made a very important distinction about meditation as a discipline or as a technique. If we practice it as a technique, then it's still our own ego that is in control. We want to get something out of it. We call the shots. But if we practice it as a discipline, then we are really opening ourselves to the mystery of meditation as a journey, the journey to our own center, the journey into God. How can we measure a journey? When I came from London to Singapore, where I am now, I began at a particular point, and I arrived at another point, and I was able to measure, more or less, where I was on the journey. I was a quarter of the way, half the way, and then I arrived. But we don't measure the spiritual life or the spiritual experience in this linear kind of way. When Jesus spoke about the Spirit, he described it as like the wind. He says we feel the wind, we can experience it, but we don't know where it comes from or where it is going. If we don't know the beginning or the end, then we don't measure it in that material kind of way. When you're learning a language or learning some other kind of skill, you can maybe measure your progress as well. But in meditation, we measure or we experience our progress in very different ways. Rather than a linear model for the spiritual journey, one of the most popular symbols in all traditions is that of the spiral. And a spiral seems at times to be doubling back on itself. We seem to be covering the same ground. And yet all the time we are moving deeper. The journey is a deepening journey of faith. Another very useful symbol for this journey is the labyrinth. On the floor of the great 13th century Cathedral of Chartres in France, there is an ancient labyrinth which was used by pilgrims of the Middle Ages to make a symbolic journey to Jerusalem. They usually made it on their knees. But it's also a symbol of the journey to our own heart. This is the journey that we begin the day we start to meditate. The Desert Fathers, the early Christian monks who have given us the earliest descriptions of this Christian tradition of meditation, spoke about different stages of the journey, somewhat similar to that experience of the spiral. They said that when you begin the journey, the spiritual journey to your own heart, to the hub of the wheel, you begin often with a great deal of enthusiasm, a great deal of optimism, and you think you're going to arrive at the goal, whatever that is, very quickly. And this is similar to the experience of starting to walk the labyrinth. Here's the center, that's the goal, that's where we want to get to, and this is where you start. And you say, well, that's great, here to here isn't very far, I can do that quite quickly. That's the initial first fervor of conversion, or the first zeal that the meditator often feels at the outset. And sometimes when you begin to meditate, you do have some quite illuminating experiences. You can have some quite strong experiences of light, of joy, of peace, and you think that that's it, I've arrived. But, as with any serious journey, which is also a relationship, and we need to understand meditation as a relationship with ourselves, with God, with other people. As with any journey, our faith is going to be tested as we enter more deeply into the experience. So when you enter the labyrinth, it seems at first as if you're going to go straight to the center. But then you find that you seem to be diverted. You're going off on this journey away from the center, and then you loop back. And then again you feel you're going to almost get to the center, and you seem to be almost brushing beside it, and then you start to move away from it. Those early Desert Fathers were great psychologists as well as great spiritual teachers. they understood that this journey of meditation takes us through cycles of growth. We see these cycles perhaps represented here in the twists and turns of the labyrinth. At first we have great enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm may begin to wane a little bit, and you may find, like most people, that after you begin to meditate, you give up after a few days or a few weeks or even a few months, and that you stop, you start again. This means that when you begin to meditate, although it seems at first that you may be heading straight for the goal, you then feel that you are losing something. The early Christian monks thought that this was equivalent to what they called acedia. Acedia is the word they use to describe the feeling of discouragement, the feeling that you're not making much progress, the feeling that maybe you're wasting your time. And most meditators run into that kind of experience at some point in their journey. You feel that this is rather dry, that nothing is happening, there's no excitement, there's no great feeling of joy or peace. And maybe you're just experiencing a deluge of distractions. And you may say to yourself, well, I'm no good at this, I really should try something different, I need something else. There are times, and if you've ever walked the labyrinth, you will probably have experienced this, when you get a moment of panic and you suddenly fear that maybe you've taken the wrong turn. Maybe you're never going to get out of this labyrinth, you're never going to get to the center, you've made some mistake. This is where you need to understand the difference, not just between discipline and technique, but also between a labyrinth and a maze. A maze is a real puzzle, and a maze is something that you get stuck in. You can't get out of it. You have to come back to where you started and escape, because there is no way through in a maze. There's no ultimate meaning in the journey. But the labyrinth is a symbol of the meaning of the spiritual journey, and the fact that there is a goal, there is a destination, and all we have to do is to follow the path. And remember something else Jesus said about the path. He says it is a narrow little path that leads to life. And saying the mantra, meditating each day, morning and evening, whatever you may feel like, whether you feel like doing it or not, that is following a narrow, humble little path. The Desert Fathers were very wise when they said that when you run into this experience of acedia, the most important thing to do is to persevere. And this is where we need the support and friendship of a community. This is very helpful in those times of discouragement. And therefore, we need to have this faith understanding of the experience of meditation to take us through these times and experiences where we seem to be moving away from the center, away from our own heart, to be lost in our distractions, lost in a desert of some kind. As we follow this labyrinth, all we have to do is to keep on the path. This is why it's very important to remember the basic simplicity of this way of meditation. To sit down, to sit still, to close your eyes, and then silently, interiorly, to keep repeating the word. Saying the word, saying your mantra, is just following this path. It's as simple as that, one foot in front of the other. Eventually you move to the other side of the labyrinth, and you begin to notice a symmetry between the two sides. The symmetry represents the pattern of experience in your life, which you begin to recognize as you look at your life from a deeper spiritual perspective. Things that don't seem balanced or connected begin to acquire a meaning and a pattern. And again, there are times when you seem to be covering the same ground, going over and over again, but eventually you come to the point of the home run, and then you find yourself moving directly into the center. But the Desert Fathers were very encouraging, and they tell us that if we persevere through these times of acedia, we come through into what they called apatheia. And although that sounds a bit like apathy, it's the complete opposite of apathy. Apatheia for them meant a healing of our inner life, a healing of our mind, a concentration of the whole person in the experience of the Spirit. In apatheia we experience harmony, stillness, bursting forth into joy. And then they said that the child of apatheia is agape. And agape is the Greek word that means love. There's a parable of Jesus about the kingdom of heaven that is very important here. He says that the kingdom of heaven is like a man who takes a seed, and he plants the seed in the ground, then he goes away, he goes to bed at night, he gets up in the morning, lives his ordinary life. But all the time the seed is growing. How, he does not know. And then eventually the first signs of growth begin to appear. Now, when we meditate, we are planting the seed of the Word deep in our hearts. And much of that growth is taking place out of sight. We can't see. How, we do not know. This is why it's important to understand that the whole of this journey is not just a technique, but it's a discipline leading us to love. St. Catherine of Siena said that all the way to heaven is heaven because Jesus is the way. We could say also that the whole of this journey is a work of love, because what we find at the center is pure love, the love of God.